Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics. So let's kick off this Sunday with an idea from an economics writer for The Guardian. National service for boomers. Now, this isn't quite Dad's Army. We're not talking about national service as it existed in the 1950s for young people, but with retirees instead. That would be silly. Mind you, you do have to make these things clear because a lot of politics is quite silly these days. Now, this would be a very different concept in order to address a very specific set of problems that we have in the UK, but where the title National Service would still fit. But first, for daily news and politics, please click the subscribe button to stay notified. So the headline of this comment piece in The Guardian is, if boomers don't want wealth taxes, they can give their time and skills. And when it comes to the boomer generation, we've got a particular problem in the UK. It's not isolated to the UK, it exists elsewhere as well, but it is an issue here. It is that this very numerous generation has not only now retired and so removed itself from the workforce, but also owns a great deal of wealth. And the trifactor of problems that the boomer generation has inadvertently created, it's not out of malice, inadvertently created, is that this wealth isn't cycling around our economy. In fact, it requires things to feed it. The boomer generation, it's a bit rude way of putting it, but the boomer generation are effectively like vampires at the moment. Our available domestic workforce has become increasingly smaller as boomers retired, with following generations not being as numerous. And this created, of course, a surge in economic migration to fill those job vacancies, which has now resulted in the use of that by the far right to stoke anti-immigration sentiment to hysterical levels. It's also probably worth considering the wealth of boomers as well. Only so much of it is money gathering dust in the bank. The rest is largely wealth that isn't real. So it needs feeding by workers, hence my comment about vampires. So for example, what form is this wealth in? Well, house prices, pensions, shares, bonds, all of these forms of wealth, they're not something you built up over your life. People think, well, I built this over my life. No, you didn't. They're maintained by the current workforce. They're constantly fed by the current workforce. If the workforce stopped contributing, those forms of wealth just disappear overnight. But that workforce is unable to keep productivity up enough to pay for this large retired generation to maintain that large amount of wealth, as well as rebuild the infrastructure which the Tories neglected for so long. Basically, we're in a bit of a mess. So this national service idea utilises the time and skills which fit and healthy retirees have available for use. Not like David Cameron's Big Society slave programme, at least I hope not, nor by effectively extending the age of retirement, which is very unpopular, but a volunteer programme to help out in the community. Now, this could be done now, you could argue, and indeed, of course it can. The author Philip Inman suggests an opt-out scheme. Obviously, you can't force community service on pensioners just because we have an economic itch to scratch. Look at the blowback from the winter fuel fiasco. Imagine saying that all pensioners deemed fit and healthy by the Department for Work and Pensions must report for unpaid work every week. But by making an opt-out, it takes effort for pensioners to remove themselves from obligations. The idea is there are people who would absolutely sign up for things like this without any sort of pressure, right? And there are people who would absolutely march down to the council buildings to remove themselves from the list, right? But there could be a whole load of people who won't go out of their way to engage. It's like, oh, there's this thing, Grandad, you should go to it. Oh, yeah, maybe I'll do that sometime. But they may not want to put effort into removing themselves from what is a national effort to solve a problem. Think of it as a bit like organ donation. So in England, we switched to an opt-out system. So instead of getting people to put effort into becoming a donor, you now have to put effort into not being a donor, which means we have access to more organ donations because most people can't be asked to opt in or out. And the same sort of applies here. Of course, to work, you'd need the rationale to be worked out properly. Like I say, it can't be like Cameron's Big Society, because the idea of that is the government sacked a load of public sector workers, but then expected people to do the work for free whilst being treated like shit in the benefit system. Slavery, basically. And if I have a concern about this idea at all, it is that a future Tory government could turn even a system that works and has the right motives into an expansion of that sort of slave labour idea. But that's not a reason to dismiss it out of hand. A government like that can corrupt anything. You'd need to be talking about things which are not the sort of jobs public sector workers are doing right now. You can't use it to boost current public sector workers, because that would then be the slippery slope to replacing workers with volunteers, and hey presto, you've got your David Cameron slave economy. It would need to be community activities which at the moment councils cannot provide services for. It would also need to be of mutual benefit to the people taking part, obviously. The original national service for young people was a compulsion. There was an obligation. There were very few reasons to be able to opt out. But it did give people who took part some useful skills, which could then be useful in their careers afterwards. It had a militaristic umbrella, but you still learned useful skills for the workplace. In this case, it's not about giving pensioners skills. It's using their skills, the skills they already have. But the payback can come in terms of, for example, combating loneliness. And if you could get a large number of people involved fairly quickly, the opt-out nature of it could actually help, because then others may want to get involved if they were initially reluctant. Obviously, something like this would need managing, and that would need paid staff. The entire project couldn't be self-sustained as such, certainly not to begin with. So there would need to be some initial investment to provide the structure for the scheme. But it could then see the return of local community projects, which cannot exist with the state of public funding these days. As the article notes, people can look at the sort of work which might be done and say, well, these are positions the council should pay someone to do. And you can say that of absolutely anything, of course. But in the here and now, there are things councils simply cannot afford to deliver, and that isn't going to change anytime soon. Will it change when the boomer generation eventually passes on its wealth to the next generation? Will that start it cycling around the economy again? Maybe, I don't know. But although boomers have now retired, they're not going anywhere anytime soon. So that is a question for the future. In the present, we have a historically large generation who have hoarded a disproportionate amount of wealth and are now effectively hoarding labour as well. It's stretching public funds, which in turn is putting pressure on our ability to fund the infrastructure needed for our economy to grow. The Tories buckled under this pressure and just didn't invest in anything. That resulted in the cost of living crisis we have now. Labour are insisting on the investment, but the pressure is still there, and that pressure is real, and doing so still creates friction because it will take time to get the results. Time the government may not have if we don't work on some quicker, shorter return schemes. Could this be one of them? A way to stretch council resources further by utilising pensioners who can give, we're not talking like 9 to 5, 5 days a week, but, a few hours a week. Will it allow councils to grow the work they can do locally instead of constantly shrinking it? The return for the pensioners could be some companionship. Like if they make friends on the scheme as well, it doesn't just mean a bit of, socialising whilst you're doing the work, but it opens up social opportunities outside the time they spend volunteering. May even have health benefits, like some people when they retire, especially if they're not one of the rich boomers who can go out and about, right, may suddenly just sit in their armchair all day. They may become way less active and decline quite quickly. The combination of loneliness and lack of physical and mental activity, probably made worse if they read the Daily Mail each day, can make some retirees go downhill rapidly. Some regular activity with their peers, connecting with the community, could be sold as a two-way benefit. For the community, the benefits are obvious. It's not expecting people to carry on working for free after they retire. It's a modest investment of time in order to allow the council to expand the work it can do and help build community cohesion. For the people involved, it could help maintain physical and mental health, keep them away from the poison in the media that they would otherwise be consuming out of boredom. As the author says towards the end of the piece, quote, "Better off boomers will be wary of proposals for a wealth tax. They will vote against council tax reform, which would clobber them for living in large, high-value properties. So if they're not donating money, let's encourage them to devote some of their time. And he concludes by saying that we are going to have to reconsider how retirement works. I absolutely agree with this. There's a pensions commission going on to do that. And everyone's looking at it and going, oh, they're going to raise the age of retirement. And the thing is, raising the state pension age is never popular. But the problems I set out at the start don't go away just because they're too awkward to face up to. So if we don't want to keep raising the pension age, and the working age population don't want to carry on working harder and harder for less and less, as more of the fruits of their labour goes into sustaining a large retired population, then we need to do something else. Could this be part of a different approach which allows us to let people retire at a reasonable age without breaking the backs of working people? But let me know what you think in the comments below. And for more content, you could subscribe to the channel or even join for access to streams and behind the scenes updates. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.